I don't know. It had me not from the beginning. It took me a little while to get into it, but boy, once I got into it, and one of those books you just didn't want to end.
Oh, that's so lovely to hear. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for writing it. Gosh.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. It was fabulous.
Thank you.
Who's that? I hear a voice, but don't see a face.
That was Julie.
Julie, hey Julie.
Yeah, that was a great book. Thanks for the selection. Thanks for the writing of it.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel very honored to have been chosen by your group, because especially this time of year, I think there are so many books being published, and it's just amazing to be selected and to connect with you all. So this is great.
Yes, thank you. Well, everyone, welcome back. Hazel Gaynor, she's here.
With a face this time, because I was just a voice.
That's great. Yes. Yeah.
It's true. So it, worked out nicely that you got to come back and we get to do it all over again and put a face with the name, with the writing, and it's wonderful. And, the book is great. And tell us everything. How are you? Where are you? How is everything going? I know the book is obviously getting so much attention and lots of positive reviews, so that's wonderful.
Oh, it's amazing. So yeah, I'm in Ireland. I'm in County Kildare, which is about an hour slightly south and in a bit from the coast from Dublin.
Beautiful.
And it's very quiet where I live. It's quite rural. We're out in the countryside. So I have to say it's been a real blessing really through lockdown, and having a space in our garden to be outside and have some outside time, even though we can't go very far because we're in second lockdown now. So we're limited to 5 kilometers for exercise, and we can't leave our county. And yeah, it's getting a bit tough now, but everybody's doing it for the right reasons. And everybody, I think this event really, for all the difficulty and challenges and how upsetting, it's also connecting us in the most amazing ways. This being an example, because we're all sharing this experience at the same time. And it's amazing actually how many parallels there are to what we're going through now with the pandemic, to some of the situations faced by Nancy and Elspeth and the group in When We Were Young and Brave. And I've had a lot of comments from readers about how it felt like the right book to read now, and almost made people feel, okay, things are bad, but things have been so much worse, and people got through it. And I think there's great comfort, isn't there, in reading about difficult periods of history and seeing that amazing resilience and resourcefulness and the spirit of hope and friendship and kindness that often accompanies really harrowing events. So very strange to have released a book in this year, and very grateful to have managed to reach readers all over the world, and if it can help distract people from bad news, if it can make people feel connected in a book group or to the characters in my story, then that's fantastic. So yeah.
And you say that, I was literally just thinking it, and I was going to bring it up 2 nights ago, how given my lifetime, I have never been in a situation like Nancy and Elspeth, thank God. But, as far as all the things I've been in, I feel like this is the closest to feeling like a war, a war of sorts, and just where everyone's lives are really just changed, and there's so much uncertainty, and, the day-to-day is just so different and unclear. But, fortunately, my family, we're healthy, we're safe, and, nothing like what they faced in the book. But as far as being able to relate, I was thinking this is probably the closest thing that I've fortunately got to compare it to.
Absolutely. And I very much the same. I mean, it's so curious for me because I spend most of my time inhabiting these distant spaces and events, and they're often, sort of based around some form of tragedy or a difficult human situation. And so to find myself having written this story of war and separation and loss, and that a sense of uncertainty, I think, is the biggest thing. You know, we obviously look back now at events like World War II, and we know there was an end. We know the date. At the time, so my characters, Nancy and Elspeth, and all of the cast in the school, and the real people who lived through this, they didn't know. And that was a really important part of this story for me to express, was that sense of helplessness in some ways. That I think Elspeth says in one of the chapters, if I just knew that this was going to continue for another month, even for another year, I could manage that. But it's the not knowing, isn't it, how this is going to end, or if it is going to end, and actually what's going to happen when it ends, because that was a real fear for the group as well. And so, yeah, I think we're all, you know, in peacetime, we're all experiencing collectively an event where life has changed literally overnight, very much like the Chifu school group, where one night they went to bed as usual, the next morning Japanese soldiers invade their school, and life will never be the same for them again. And, you know, and I hope that people reading this story will be able to take some hope from that sense of enduring, and that we can overcome difficult situations, and we will overcome this one as well. So yeah, it was really incredible for me to, when I was editing the book at the start of lockdown in March, sort of reading sentences I'd written months or years before, and suddenly it was as if I was writing it today, you know, about we didn't know when it, and the sense of separation from loved ones, and how would it feel when we got to see them again. And that's exactly what we're going through now. So yeah, curious parallels, definitely.
Certainly. And all of the time that you must have put into just researching this historical event. And I know you've written many historical fiction novels now. So, you know, I know that it's, you know, it's your forte, but I was just thinking of all the time and the research that you had to do to tell this story so, you know, in such precise detail.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, this is my 8th historical novel. It doesn't get any easier.
Right.
And I actually, you know, this was a new period of history for me, and this was a brand new location. I hadn't written a novel set in China before, or in Asia.
Have you been?
I knew you were going to ask. No, I haven't. And again, a strange thing happened when I was writing this book. My husband was invited to China with a business trip, so he did go several times, and I was like, I need to go for research, and would have had this situation not happened. But I think we're very fortunate now. We can travel virtually, can't we, quite easily. We can access all sorts of virtual maps. We can walk streets virtually, and there's an enormous amount of historical information about this particular group, the Chifu school group and Weishen internment camp. So I was able to find a huge amount of information, and actually within that, lots of incredible detailed information, which I think really brings this kind of historical event to life, and is what readers connect with. You know, we're not sometimes so interested about those key battles, like, you know, the Battle of Midway, or key sort of military events in a war. I think what I'm certainly interested in, and I think a lot of readers are the very human day-to-day experience within war. So, you know, people worrying about what are we going to eat tomorrow? How do we keep warm? How do I keep you safe? You know, those are the things we can relate to today. So yeah, lots of research about the war in the Pacific, which interestingly hasn't been written about very much in fiction. You know, World War II fiction is enormously popular, but predominantly within Europe and the USA. So to set a book in that part of the war was really fascinating. And, you know, lots of archives that I accessed at the University of London, which is always amazing when you can actually get primary source material and read the words that somebody sat down and wrote about their experience. Is incredible. It's really powerful. You know, that's where I got a lot of the detail about day-to-day life in camp. You know, it's sort of minute by minute, hour by hour and how people kept their spirits up through, returning to their weekly meetings of Girl Guides, that sort of detail. And you try and then blend all that into a novel that is set around all of that history, but isn't in any way a history lesson. I think it's a real balance for a historical novelist to keep the reader engaged in the characters. It's this characters, it's Nancy, it's Elspeth, it's Mouse and Sprout and Minnie, and all of those gorgeous characters that I missed now that I've finished writing the book. And it's lovely for me to hear readers talk about them and relate to them, because they do become very, very real when you're writing them. Yeah,
they do. And I don't listen to too many audiobooks, only because, I always tell the group this, I find that my mind wanders if I'm driving and I've got the audiobook, I'm thinking about what I have to do or where I'm going, of course, focusing on the road. But this one I did spend a good portion of the book listening to the audio, and I loved the different voices, and when the narrator would do Sprout and Nancy's little voice, it was really nice and helped to, I think, picture them.
Yeah, they've done such an amazing job, and I was really fortunate. I get given sort of samples of different narrators, and can sort of pick my favorites. And you don't always get your first choices because they get booked up so quickly. And I was so fortunate with Rosie and Imogen, who read Nancy and Elspeth. Imogen read The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter, my previous book, and I just loved her style. And I listened to a sample of Rosie Jones narrating Nancy, and I burst into tears because she captures that childhood voice so well, and that sort of fear and innocence, and, as you say, sort of really adds another level to these characters that spent so long in my mind. So I think the audio, lots of readers have listened to this, and I think it lends itself really well to audio. Yeah, it's a great way to absorb a book when you maybe are a little bit distracted and can't you sit and concentrate on a page as much. And I think we're all suffering from that a bit at the minute. So audio is a great alternative. Yeah.
Right. No, it sucked me right in. So that was wonderful.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, and you mentioned that when you were in London, studying some of the historical documents, were there people's writings that you studied that specifically inspired Elspeth and Nancy, or any of the other characters?
Yeah, really, Elspeth and Nancy are both, I suppose, a composite of lots of people's stories. So they don't tell any one person's specific story. It's a combination of what I read, not just about the Chifu school group, but there were lots of other Western children and adults who were interned in different camps around the Asia area. So I read lots of books where other examples of that situation were spoken about. Lots of the children as adults have been interviewed and have talked very, very frankly about their experience, and they have these incredibly clear memories of the people they connected with, what it was like, the setting, the sky, the birds. All of that comes through in the book, hopefully. So yeah, lots of diaries from some of the teachers, and lots of little journals and particularly the logbooks from Brownie Guides and Girl Guides, which again I talk about in the book, where the children wrote just lovely innocent little things like, we worked on our knot badges today, or whatever it might be. And you think, how amazing that they're in this incredibly difficult situation, separated from their parents, don't know when they're going to see them again, and their teachers have so cleverly distracted them by keeping something that's really important to them going. So Girl Guide was a really big thing. So yeah, the Brownie Guide books, and actually this amazing website that the adults have created where they've written sort of little essays and shared photographs and drawings, a lot of drawings that they did, which is how I got visual references of the camp. So gosh, I'm so grateful to them for being so brave, telling this story, writing this story down so that future generations will know that this happened. And I think it's so important that we capture these stories and experiences and share them, because it's just incredible. It really is incredible that it happened. And I think, sometimes when I'm writing a fictional setting around a real event, I have to keep reminding myself, this really happened. This really happened to someone like me, who suddenly found herself in charge of 100 children who were displaced from their parents and were under Japanese guard. I mean, unbelievable. So yeah, I feel a real sense of duty to get their story, to portray it authentically, even though I'm creating fictional words and thoughts, but you base it in the facts that you've discovered. Yeah.
Well, it is educational, even with all of the elements of the fiction and the storytelling around it, there is, at least for me, I love to be able to picture history that way versus just reading it in, a much more dry textbook back in school. So
Yeah.
this just brings history to life, and it's really cool.
And I think it's a lovely way to learn, isn't it? And that's partly why I love writing and reading historical fiction, because it's a more colourful way of learning about those events we often only see in black and white. And there's a lot actually of black and white footage of both of the wars, and even those classic serious Victorian photographs we only ever see in black and white. And there's a lot of digital colorization happening now, and it changes your view completely when you see an image from the trenches in World War I in color is so different to seeing it in black and white. Obviously, much more graphic. And I think when you colorize a Victorian serious lady, she suddenly becomes far more human. And, we forget, don't we? People didn't walk around in black and white frowning all the time. They laughed, they cried. And, that's what I try and do with my novels, is bring that human connection and emotion that we all have, regardless of what period of history we lived in, and sort of bring that to the page. And I love hearing readers when they finish the book say, oh, I had to go and Google Gifu School, or I Googled Wei Shen internment camp, because it's that sense of curiosity that, gosh, this really happened. I need to go and read more about it, which is lovely.
Right. That's what I was going to say too. It must be a really great sign when, like me, and, like I know Sabrina just commented, she always looks up the maps of where things take place. And, now I want to go and read the historical facts about this, because you've just opened my mind so much to it, and it is really interesting. So
we all go down Google rabbit holes. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
You can blame me for, wasting hours on the internet.
I think it's far superior to scrolling Instagram aimlessly. So I think this would be productive, actually.
It's productive use of time, isn't it? Yeah. And it's, and again, this particular story, I chose to tell a part of that story from the point of view of, an English child and an English teacher. And they have obviously different cultural connections in the characters around them. But, that story doesn't end there. The story didn't end when the war ended. And that's what I think is amazing about these experiences, that the legacy goes on. And we've just commemorated the 75th anniversary of VJ Day, Victory Over Japan Day. And that event brings so much more memory, story, shared experience. And it makes you realize, this didn't end with liberation. It didn't end when they went back to England or America or Canada. It continued for the rest of their lives, and still is, and that's why I feel so compelled to write historical fiction, because in some ways I don't think it's historical at all. I think it's living history. It's still going on. So yeah, I encourage people to Google and read more.
And you mentioned there's a website where, is it the accounts from the children now as older adults? Is that something that the public can go on and see these stories?
Yeah, so in the back of the book, there's a recommended reading list, and in there is the website, weishenpaintings.org, I think it is.
Okay, great.
And again, it's this enormous resource. I mean, I don't think I even managed to access half of it.
Wow.
but incredibly powerful, poignant memories. And, you know, for a lot of the children, they had real emotional issues in later life. You know, they had this awful sense of separation, of abandonment from their parents. You know, that unending fear of what was going to happen to them, and has psychologically affected many of them. So they've almost used this as a cathartic way to get their experiences out and share them with other children who were there. And it's just incredibly moving to read that and to understand a little of what they went through. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll get the link and I'll post it in the group so that everyone can check it out. And I read somewhere online, and I'm not sure if this was accurate, but does this book tie into your other book is quite new as well, The Bird in the Bamboo Cage, right?
It's the same book. Yeah, it's the same book. Yeah.
Stop
So
it.
I know this has
never
been
knew that.
this has been so confusing. So
Oh,
the two books are the
Okay.
same. They just have different titles. So in the UK and Ireland and Australia, the book is known as The Bird in the Bamboo Cage. And in the US and
funny.
Canada, it's known as When We Were Young and Brave. So I feel like I've spent the last 6 months sort of cheating in a way, because people think I've written 2 books, but I only wrote one.
I did. I thought, wow, you're just whipping them out. How funny.
It's set in China in the war. Yeah, no, it's the same exact book, but it
Okay.
has a different title and a different cover in the 2 different territories, as we call them. So yeah, I can't claim to have written a book that quickly.
But still, and that's a beautiful cover as well.
Yeah, do you know, and I love them both, and it's not unusual. I think having different titles isn't as common. But different covers for different parts. And
Sure.
you know, when my books are translated into European languages, you get again different covers. So it's always fascinating to me to see which covers go to which countries. So, and I've had great feedback from both sides, so I hope we got it right.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love both covers, but I really did. I thought they were 2 different books.
I
And
know, yeah. No, I can't claim to have been that productive, I'm
Right.
afraid.
So I guess when I read that they were connected somehow, I don't know if I missed a paragraph or something.
Yeah.
And so how long
Yeah.
did this book take you to write? I know you mentioned you've been writing it for a few years. I can imagine with all the, information you have to collect.
Yeah, so this is probably the most challenging, daunting book I've written since my debut, because as I said, it was a very different period of history. I hadn't covered the Second World War, and setting it in a country that was culturally so vastly different to my influences, and that I hadn't been to, was a challenge as well. But never fear anything, as I say. And resource and research can really, really help. So I started writing in 2017. So 3 years on and off, because I was finishing final edits in March of this year. And I really feel the book needed that amount of time for me to understand the different layers. So I had to understand the bigger sphere of World War II. I had to understand the Sino-Japanese War, how that had affected China. And then I had to understand this particular school and the experiences of this group and the Weishen internment camp. So there were lots of to the research. And I heard the story first in a podcast in This American Life. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that podcast.
I've heard
And
of
that was first broadcast in 2015. So the story has been out there for a while, but it was just one of those, when I heard it, I was like, I'm sorry, what happened? And the connection to Girl Guide. I hadn't really thought, obviously, the evacuees who were taken from the cities in the UK, but I hadn't thought about children being displaced in other parts of the world to such an extent, and particularly not in internment camps outside of, obviously, the internment camps in Europe. So just a really incredible part of the war that I hadn't heard about. And I needed that time, I think, to research, to process, to figure out the right way to tell the story. And that quite quickly came to being Nancy and Elspeth, because I felt I needed to represent both sides of the experience. So obviously the more innocent perspective of youth, and the real, we know what's happening perspective of the adult, and how the two almost rely on each other as much to keep going in the end. So yeah, it took a while to figure it out, to still all that research, and lots of my research never found its way into the book because there was just too much. So you've got to sort of distill it down into what needs to be in there. Yeah.
I think you pared it down perfectly.
Oh, thank you. Good. I think if you, and certainly when I read historical novels, I think you should never really be pulled out of the story too much about the author at work. So ideally, as a reader, you just become immersed in the story, in the characters, in the events, and maybe only afterwards you think, goodness, how did they ever figure that all out, you know?
Yeah.
So I think we have to wear the quite lightly on the page, and that it just becomes inherent in the page. So you do have to leave a lot out. Yeah.
And I love the back and forth between Nancy and Elspeth and seeing the different perspectives. And it was funny when I was always picturing Elspeth as much older than she was. And of course, then she's my age.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Just she seems far more, proper and together than
Proper
I am.
and prim. And, and that's exactly of the era, because, I think there was so much more formality to life during the war years and preceding the war. And I think people did seem older. I think we're very lucky now. We have way more options. We have way more liberties in how we live our lives, particularly as women. We have options now to raise a family, to work at the same time, to have a career. We can do an awful lot more. And I think women in the past seemed to be so much older before their time, because they seemed to have a narrower life in some ways. And obviously that real sort of keep calm and carry on, very British Empire attitude was inherent within somebody like Elspeth. And it's interesting to see her character develop from being quite resistant in the beginning, sort of almost irritated that she's had to stay at this school, and now look what's happened, and responsible for the children, but which all comes from her own sense of insecurity, and that she learns so much from the children and from the situation, and mellows and softens through that, and some of those prim edges get knocked off her, don't they? So yeah, she was really interesting to write.
Understandably so as well.
Yeah, no space for prim and proper, but again, fascinating that, and this was taken directly from research, that even when they found themselves in the internment camp in the harshest of conditions, the teachers still insisted on proper table manners, saying their prayers before they ate, elbows off the table, don't speak with your mouth full. And I think this was amazing, that these standards were upheld, even though they'd never experienced anything like this before. So sort of incredible foresight of the teachers to keep the children on track almost, and not let them, become wild in any way.
And it's interesting too when Elspeth would talk with Minnie about how the children, they had to keep their routine and their structure and everything that was familiar to them to keep them comfortable. And it's interesting because now with all of the different kids being at home from school, other kids being in school, and just their whole day-to-day life is so different, that people are trying to just maintain some sense of routine and normalcy for these kids all over.
And again, there's another parallel. So when everything was changing so rapidly, and the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring was ever present, the teachers just held tightly to the things that were familiar and the things they could control. And they were very limited, but one of those was that weekly meeting of girl guides, was their familiarity of prayers, of song, of little routines. And you're absolutely right that now, when we've had children at home, we've had some sort of blended learning of, sort of virtual classrooms, homeschooling. What do we instinctively do? We try and keep everything as normal as we possibly can, even though there's absolute chaos going on around us. And it's exactly that same instinct of, okay, well, let's have dinner at the same time because that's what we always do, and keep all the routines you can when all the other things. So again, yeah, incredible parallels, and that connection of teachers to students, which is so important. And I think we've all taken a step and gone, goodness, I'll never complain about a teacher ever again because this is amazing.
Right.
What they do. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. No, it's great.
Very humbling. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is, like you said, it's very serendipitous that the book came out now, when it did, it came out recently.
Yeah. And, you obviously you have no idea what the world is going to look like because, as I said, I started to write this book in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
I was given a publication date possibly about 18 months ago for this time of year in this year. So you don't know what's going to happen. And one of the big things that's changed is how people access books. So, we're now having to rely on booksellers being very resilient and offering curbside collection or click and collect, or we're all buying books online from our bookshops. So, not only has life changed, but it was also quite worrying for a lot of authors and publishers because we didn't know how would our books get to readers if all the places readers normally buy books are now shut.
And no in-person tours. I'm sure that was a big question mark.
Yeah. So I was all due to be coming to the States and, had this big tour planned. But I have to say, it's been amazing to connect with readers through these Zoom events. And I've probably been able to connect with many more readers in further states than I would have done because obviously I could only travel for so long given my family at home. And a lot of readers have said for the first time, they've been able to connect with an author because they wouldn't have been able to travel to an event, or they wouldn't have felt comfortable traveling to sit in an event in a public space. So this has been amazing for readers and writers as a sort of unexpected silver lining in a way, that we've found a new way to connect. And I think this will continue. I think there'll always be a blend now of sort of in-person, and especially for me here in Ireland, I can't always hop over to the States or to Canada or anywhere in the world. So it's fabulous that I can be at home, connect with you guys, and not have to abandon the kids for 2 weeks to do that. They're quite happy.
Oh no, I'm sure. Well, let us know when things do calm down and you do have a tour here in the States. I'm sure we're all scattered all over the country and really all over the world in our group.
Yeah,
we'll be sure to get there when we can.
Fantastic. Well, fingers crossed. I think at this stage we'll wait and see. But I think it's going to be amazing, isn't it, when we can all be together in person and see the full person and not just that little tiny screen.
But we won't be able to wear our pajama pants.
This is it. We'll have to be fully suited and booted. So, there is that as well. There is that.
It's okay. But
it's been fabulous to connect.
No, we love having you here. Thank you. And I know that some of the members did have questions for you, if that's okay, if I can.
Of course, yeah, of course.
Well, I know first Mary Eileen had a question. Mary Eileen, are you there? Can you unmute yourself and you can ask Hazel? Let's see. I just saw her up top. Oh, here she is. Mary Eileen? You there? Okay.
We can't hear.
Okay, we'll come back. Who else had a question? Sabrina? Sabrina, do you have a question?
I think mine was more of a comment
Okay.
than a question, I guess. I did the audiobook version and absolutely fell in love with the characters. I think there was a huge time gap between when they were returned, the children were returned, and then when they meet back up. And I guess for me, I wish I would have had a lot more of that in between time. How did they get back home? How were their homes destroyed? What was the economy like? Because it was non-existent. You know, family and friends, and how did they meet those people back and things like that. Of course, for me, every one of your characters could have a series. It could be its own.
There you go. So that would be another 3 books.
Yeah, we'd love that.
Yeah, and that's it. Thank you, Sabrina, for the comment. And I think that's one of the decisions that you have to take as a novelist in order to keep the book to a reasonable length. How much detail in those sort of in-between stages do you focus on? And I think to a degree, you have to stick with your instinct of what's important in telling the full story. And the next big thing for me was the group reconnecting in the later decades. So I think you have to leave a little bit to the reader's imagination. But there you go. We've now got a mini series of each character reuniting with their family and friends. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that would be great. And, speaking of mini series, I'm thinking television wise, I always ask this, are there any plans for a film or TV, or, even if there's no plans yet, did you have actors or actresses in mind for some of these main characters?
Oh gosh, that's an amazing question. And the answer is not yet, but
Okay.
that's how I always answer that question, because I would just love to see, I think this one more than any, of course I'd love to see all of my books on the big screen, or the small screen as it is now, because we're all into streaming services. But not yet, but there have been expressions of interest, shall we say. So I mean, historical period dramas are notoriously expensive to make, so I think they take longer. They take a bigger commitment to convert to the screen. Who would play? Gosh, that's a really good question. I haven't really thought about it, to be honest. I think you'd probably have to have a complete unknown set of children, like the cast for the Harry Potter movies.
Yeah.
Just incredible actors who are quite new, so that we don't say, oh, well, she was such and such.
Right.
For the children, I think that would be amazing to get that real raw naivety.
You have kids, right?
Well, yeah, I could throw them in there. Yeah. Yeah, there's an alternative career route for them.
Right.
So I have to think about. Yeah, actually, do you know? I mean, I love all the cast of Downton Abbey. I love the actor, and I can't remember her name, who played Anna Bates.
Oh, yes.
Maid says she'd be a fabulous Elspeth. She's got an accent as well. So yeah, Joanne.
Oh, that is a good idea.
Yeah,
that's
I'll
great.
keep thinking.
Okay, yes, keep us posted on that. But that's a really good idea. Mary Eileen, I know you're there. You unmuted. Can we hear you? No, we still can't. No, I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm going to ask her a question. She typed them in. She wanted to know, did you know Eric Liddell was there before you chose this camp?
No, I didn't. Thank you, Mary Eileen, for the question. Yeah, so Eric Liddell, as I was researching this story of the missionary school children and Wei Shen internment camp, and stumbled across this incredible piece of history from a whole other sphere, that the Olympian Eric Liddell was in the camp. And this was just amazing because, again, I'd never heard of Wei Shen internment camp, and it just sort of showed me the scale and the scope. I mean, it was the largest, actually, of the internment camps in China. And his role in, again, you know, helping the kids to get through this ordeal by taking them out for PE lessons and having races. And, you know, he's known as Uncle Eric. He was known as Uncle Eric to the children, and his kindness really shone through. And, you know, he did unfortunately die in the camp. And, you know, I think when you hear of a story like that, that's totally unexpected, you know, I didn't expect to ever find that connection to this group. Just again adds this extra layer of intrigue and history. And what an incredible man. I mean, and again, had such an impact on the group, on the children. You know, they all have spoken in later life as adults incredibly fondly of him. So, you know, very fond memories of him. Yeah, so, but that was an amazing extra thing to discover. So thank you, Mary Eileen, for the question.
Wow. And it'll be interesting to read more about that too as we go back and, you know, read the site that you gave us and just read more of the historical facts.
Yeah.
In general.
And again, there's a whole other story within the story. So, you know, somebody may come along and choose to tell that story. I mean, how he ended up there, what his story was. Just
No, that's true. And she just said, Mary Eileen said, I was surprised how the Red Cross managed to get some supplies to the camps.
Yeah, so supplies were, you know, this, there was a very human element to this. And obviously the Red Cross around the world were tasked with making sure people were as well as they could be given the circumstances. Unfortunately, the food parcels didn't get through to those who needed it as often as they should have, which is often the case, isn't it? With disruption and you know, in charge deciding not to give the packages to the children. But it made it all the more exciting when they did arrive, and you know, just a small bit of fruit cake or you know, a little bit of chocolate, and how much that meant to them was amazing to read. So yeah, I mean, they lived on very, very little for a very long time, and these were children who had wanted for nothing. And I think that's remarkable, that change in circumstance so quickly, and how they were able to, you know, keep going and you know, make the best of things is just incredible.
Really is, between the children and the adults. I mean, I don't know. I think it'd probably be easier for the children. I was just thinking, I don't know who it would have been easier or harder for. Maybe the children because of their, you know, innocence and naivete, but also then they're away from their parents. So not fun for anyone. But
yeah, and that's exactly why I wanted to show both sides, because I think, you know, obviously the children are protected somewhat by their innocence, and they are easily distracted and, oh, let's go and play this game, and they almost forget where they are, whereas the adults were very exposed to all of the dangers that came with being interned, and were obviously dealing with their own fears as well as having to mind and be responsible for the children's well-being. So there's additional pressures there as well, which is why I sort of showed that change in Elspeth's attitude of just how significant and life-changing event this was for someone like her, for the teachers, for the adults. Yeah.
Wow. I've got a raised hand here. Renata, you have a question for Hazel? If you want to unmute yourself. I hear you.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm calling in from India, and I haven't read the book because When We Were Young and Brave wasn't available in India, but I just looked up Bird in a Bamboo Cage, and it is. So I placed my order right now, and it should reach me in another week or so.
Oh, how fabulous. Thank you so much.
So I'm really glad I attended. I was a little skeptical because I haven't read the book, but historical fiction is one of my favorite genres, and I really wanted to be here and listen to Hazel. But I'm glad I came, so now I know about this book and I will read it. And thank you, Hazel, for this talk, and Juliana for conducting this for us. It really means a lot, especially in these pandemic times where we don't have access to our regular book clubs and to meet authors and meet readers. And it's really wonderful being here. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us all the way from India.
Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you. And I'm actually so pleased now that Juliana mentioned the bird in the bamboo cage so that we could make that connection. So
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy the book. The power of Zoom. There we
True.
are.
You'll enjoy the book, I'm sure. So wonderful. Did anyone else have questions?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions.
Oh.
This is Karen.
Hey, Karen.
Hi, Karen.
Hi. So I had two questions. One was just the two guards, Home Run and Trouble, went from each place, so they stayed throughout, and that was obviously important for the story of it. But I was just wondering if in your research, was that something that really happened? It just sort of struck me. It just didn't seem like, was that feasible that the guards would be sort of going along with the same group? So I was just wondering if that was based in historical fact.
Yeah. So they, again, aren't specifically based on a person.
Right.
They're more a combination of some of the soldiers that, again, this website, the resources that I was talking about, that children have, mentioned by name. These people must have had such a huge impact on them. You can only imagine this man in charge of you wielding a gun, maybe with a guard dog, had a profound impact on them. And so Trouble, Home Run, Charlie Chaplin, they're all based on real guards that were with the Chifu group, some of whom did move with them from Chifu to Temple Hill to Wei Shen. And that also, the connection the children had with some of the guards was also based in fact that all of the guards weren't fearful and outwardly violent, that there were those who were more compassionate, and that the children formed something of a friendship is, probably too strong a word, but an understanding with. And I found that fascinating. But then in a way I wasn't surprised, because of course in every situation you have exceptions to the rule. So you would obviously have somebody who has on the same uniform, but maybe the children remind that guard of his family that he is also displaced from and worrying about. So I found that a really important and interesting part of the experience, that not all of the guards frightened the children. And I developed that with Home Run and his connection with Nancy and Mouse and Sprout. So yeah, that was really interesting.
That was interesting. So that is really interesting that they actually did, that some of them were consistent.
Yeah, absolutely.
The experiences. And my other question was, I had just recently read the Nightingale book.
Lovely.
So I'm sure many people, are familiar with it. So if you're not, it also set in World War II, two sisters who are going through, experiences in occupied France. And in that book, they also use this format of, after the war, they were sort of reminiscing and talking, to introduce different parts. And I read that in another book group, and we all sort of agreed that at different points we weren't sure which sister had actually was the narrator.
I was the same in that book. Yeah.
And so I was wondering if you had ever thought about doing that with your characters. I mean, so we knew, right? We knew because you had the names that they both had survived. Or Nancy at least had survived into adulthood. So I was just wondering sort of the sort of artistic, creative decision to do that.
Yeah, and that's a really great question. And I think in early drafts, so it was less obvious, and it was maybe not, you weren't sure which of the children was speaking to us now as an adult. And I sort of talked that through, and in second, third, different drafts, we felt that because essentially this, I think, is Nancy's story. It's her childhood, and it's her who continues to tell the story as an adult. And I have done that in other books. We've been unsure who the narrator is, and with this one, I just felt there was enough to come in the harrowing situation, in the changing circumstances. There was enough for the reader to deal with, that it didn't really lend too much more if I held back who this narrator future was. And I think it was important to have Nancy speak to us directly, and sort of remove that uncertainty, because there's so much more coming. So, but it certainly was something we talked about. Yeah, great questions. And I love your background. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,
Dia de los Muertos.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Does anyone else have a question for Hazel? Feel free to unmute yourself.
These are great questions. You've all been doing your homework and read the book, which is fabulous.
Well, if not, I have a question. So we all love your writing. We loved Meet Me in Monaco with Heather. I know that you and Heather, you have another book. It's finished, correct?
Yes.
And when is that one coming out? Because we love Heather as well.
Yeah, so obviously you know from when we chatted about Meet Me in Monaco, so Heather Webb and I co-write historical novels sort of every other year.
Mm-hmm.
So we've just finished editing our third collaboration, which is due to be published in July of next year. And it's called 3 Words for Goodbye. This is all quite new information because we've only just settled on titles.
Thank you.
And we've been writing this through most of this year, so having a really strange writing experience. The book it was inspired initially by Nellie Bly, who some of you will be familiar with, a famous investigative female journalist from the late 1800s in America, who famously got herself into an insane asylum to report on the conditions there. But what Nellie Bly also did was she traveled around the world, but she said she could do it in less than 80 days from the famous Around the World in 80 Days, and she did. And that was the springboard for our story. So the story starts with 2 sisters who can't stand the sight of each other. This is in 1937, so just pre-Second World War, and their grandmother sends the 2 of them off to Europe together to tie up some loose ends of her life that started when she went to Europe, having met Nellie Bly after her Around the World experience. So there's this sort of sense of travel, family, legacy, and these 3 letters that our 2 sisters have to deliver, one in Paris, one in Venice, one in Vienna, and through that journey obviously have to learn to get along. So it was the most amazing book to write, because obviously we've been able to travel nowhere, and yet virtually and on the page we've been to 3 amazing European cities. And this story is set, as I said, just pre-war, so there's obviously a lot happening politically in Europe at the time, which again has really strange parallels with what we're all going through as well at the minute. So it's just been amazing fun to write. Is a fun book, you know, that there's a lot of humor, there's a lot of that antagonism you get often between sisters. They are polar opposites. And obviously the sense of travel and journey has been incredibly fun to write as well. So we're very excited about it releasing next summer.
Well, I know what we're reading next July or August.
We've got 3 locations in one.
Yeah, so that's perfect. Oh, good. And
we were thinking of you, obviously, when we wrote it.
Thank you. I love that. And so you said this was your 8th novel. So you have so many others. Now, which others is there? Do you have a favorite? Or if you know, we were all to go pick up one of your other books right now, is there one you might recommend? Oh, didn't you guys do a Christmas book, Last Christmas in Paris?
Yes, Heather and I did. So yeah.
Oh, Sabrina just said that. How funny.
Yeah. So that was our first. Thank you, Sabrina. So that was Heather and I's first collaboration. Perfect for this time of the year.
Yeah.
Was released in 2017, I think I'm right in saying. And actually, it's been amazing because every holiday season, starting about now, we get people reading it again. And people have fallen in love with our characters, Tom and Evie, set in World War I. And the whole book is written in letters exchanged between Tom, who's fighting at the front, and his childhood friend Evie, who is left behind in England. And it was just the most amazing book to write. So that would be a perfect read for this time of year from our collaboration. And of my own, I think probably the one I wrote before this, The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter.
Okay.
A lot of people have discovered recently and have adored. It's lighthouses, it's storms at sea, it's partly Newport, Rhode Island, partly
You know that's where I
Northumberland.
am right now.
You're in Newport?
I'm in Newport. That's where I live.
There you go. It was meant to be.
How fun. I had no idea. I've seen the cover. It's beautiful. I thought, even right now I'm looking outside, I can see the water. It's very gray. And
No way.
at the lighthouse. That's so cool.
There you go. So it's partly set in Rose Island Lighthouse, which is in the bay.
Yeah.
And inspired again by an amazing historical figure, Grace Darling, an English heroine who lived in a lighthouse in northeast of England. So it's two women connected across 100 years.
Yes.
And two lighthouses, one of which is outside your window. So there you go.
So wild. Amazing. Yeah, well, I will be getting that one.
There you go.
Hang up.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Hazel. You're lovely. I'm so glad we were able to see you this time.
Yes.
Yeah,
I was nervous. I was like, is my camera working?
No, it worked perfectly. And you're such a great writer and such a lovely person. And
thank you.
Yeah, so we'll look forward to having you back then next summer.
Absolutely.
On world tour. And
absolutely. we'll be back, both of us, and very excited to have that book written now, and it'll be covers released next, and then we can start to share and get excited about it. So
great.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the amazing questions. You've all been very kind. Thank you for reading the book. Amazing.
Thank you for writing the book. It's very, and I'm going to make sure everybody knows now in our group, in case there were people who couldn't read it because of their location, that The Bird in the Bamboo Cage is an alternative way to grab the story. So
yeah, absolutely. Same book, different faces.
Different cover, different title. Beautiful as well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And let's definitely stay in touch.
Guys.
If you guys want to follow Hazel on her social media accounts, you always post some really beautiful pictures of Ireland, which is also nice. And gin, and you also like gin.
I do like gin. Yeah, I do. I'm afraid it's my little habit.
Gin and coffee, I noticed we have those things in common, so that's great. All right. Well, thank you so much again. Stay healthy. Stay safe.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Stay safe. See you next year.
Bye. Thank you. See
Bye.
you next year.
Take care.
You as well. Thank you.